In this video we're going to take a look at creating this procedural birch bark shader. I probably could have taken this a little bit further with the bump and roughness map, but I was pretty happy with it, and at this point my computer was starting to slow down, so I decided to stop it here. But let's take a look at how I did this. So to set up our scene, let's start by scaling this cube on the z-axis by a factor of 0.1. I just hit S, Z, and 0.1, and then enter. And let's apply that scale as well. Let's come over here to the modifiers panel and turn on the bevel modifier and change it to 5 segments, and then let's enable smooth shading. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag my window over here and add the shader editor on the left, and then let's go into top view and enable rendered mode. I wanted to start by making those thin lines that you see on birch trees. I brought in a Voronoi texture and let's change it to F2. Let's see what this looks like. I'm going to change this scale to 2, and let's put a color ramp after here as well. I'm going to change the black to 0.27, and the white is going to be 0.74. Just like that. Now with this Voronoi texture highlighted, I'm going to hit Control T and bring up the texture coordinate and mapping nodes, and I'm going to put a noise texture on the vector line here. Let's go ahead and make sure it's coming from object as well. Let's bring in a mix RGB, which allows us to control the noise texture's influence on the final product. And let's set this scale to 10 and the detail to 16. And then let's change this factor to 0.95. Now to stretch these out, let's come over here to the mapping node, and I'm going to change this Y value in the scale to 10. And now we can see we've got these thin horizontal pieces. Next up, I want to set up our color for this birch tree. So let's go ahead and bring in another color ramp and put it right after this one. And we are going to have 6 points here. We're going to have a point at 0, so I'll leave that where it is. And then this highest point is going to be at 0.67. So it's going to be 4 other points in the middle there. This one's going to be at 0.31. I'll add in another one. Let's put this at 0.4. And then there's going to be 2 at 0.52 and 0.53. Just like that. And this lowest color, I'm going to leave that as black. This color right here, let's set this to a brown color. You know, something like this might do. We can always change it later. This next one we'll set at a gray. We'll just leave it actually, that's fine. And then this next one, we're going to set this as a beige color. Need to zoom in a little bit, or zoom out a little bit rather. So we'll just set it at something like this. That's fine there. And then the next two we'll just leave as is actually. This is fine as a gray, and this one should be white. Let's just make sure it is. Yeah, looks good. Let's just go in and adjust this color here. I think it'd look a bit better if it was just a little bit less saturated. Yeah, that looks good so far. So next up, what I wanted to do is I wanted to make those larger black, they look almost like burnt pieces. So to do that, I brought in a noise texture, and I set this quite low to 0.5 and left the detail at 2. And let's do Control T and bring up the texture coordinate mapping nodes there. And I'm going to bring this noise texture, duplicate it, and just bring it over here. Make sure this is coming out of object. And I'm going to add in a mix RGB so we can control this here. Plug this into the color 2, and we're going to change this noise to 10. And let's see what this looks like so far. Move this principled shader over here. We're going to use that eventually. And let's add in a color ramp, and we'll put this here, and we'll bump the black up to 0.4, and this white part we'll put to 0.42. And then we'll set this mix to 0.8, just like that. Let's then zoom in on this mapping node right here, and let's take that Y value again. Let's change this to 4. So let's see what that does. It just stretches this out. This last part we're going to do here, this is going to be the texture inside these black areas. I just didn't want to leave it completely black. I wanted to put some variation in there. So to do that, let's bring in a Voronoi texture and set this to distance to edge. And I'm going to hit Control T and bring up the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. And we're going to put a noise texture on the vector line here. Let's go ahead and put that there. Make sure this is coming out of object as well. And let's add in a mix RGB and make sure we plug in object to color 2. So this noise, for the scale, let's set it to 12 and then the detail to 16. And for this mix, let's set this to 0.73. And then let's come over here to the Voronoi and let's set this to 5.8. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is bring in a color ramp. Put it here. And then we're going to have 3 points here. Black is going to be at 0.13 and white is going to be at 0.51, but we're going to change that to gray. So let's just crank that down a little bit, maybe halfway. And then we're going to add one more point in the middle here at 0.33, and this is going to be kind of a brown color. You can try something like this. We can always change that if we want, but that looks pretty good so far. So what we want to do is have this texture that we just created appear in these areas. So the way we can do that is with a mix RGB. I'm just going to place it here, and let's plug this bottom black part into the factor. And then we're going to plug this other texture we made into color 1. And now we can see that color showing through. We can adjust this a little bit, maybe turn it down so it's not quite so noticeable, and let's turn this up so it's a bit wider. So next what I'd like to do is mix these two parts together, and that's pretty easy to do. We're just going to bring up a mix RGB node there, and let's go ahead and change this to multiply and change that factor to 1, just like this. Let's take a look at what this looks like. Okay, looking good. Plug this into the base color there. Let's view this BDSF. Yeah, it's looking good. So at this point, I was looking at these edges, and I just wanted to make them a little bit more jagged. So I came over here, and I just used this noise texture, and I duplicated it and put this right here. So I could have used a mix RGB again to kind of control this factor, but I didn't really worry about it too much. I just kind of plopped it in there, and you can see what effect it has. It's just made this, you know, a bit more jagged, a bit more random. So this is what I'm left with here. So really quick, let's just create a roughness and a bump map. I'm going to take this color ramp here and this color ramp here and just combine these. Actually, let's not do it like that. That'll screw up my other setup. I'm going to just take this multiply here and let's plug this right into color 1 and this one into color 2. Let's take a look at what we've got here. Okay, yeah, looks pretty good. Let's bring in an invert node here because we want those parts to be the least rough. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, looks pretty good. So let's try plugging that into roughness right here. Let's take a look at our principled BDSF. And there we go. Yeah, it's not too bad. I'm going to actually turn that down a little bit to maybe 0.6. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. It's if you turn it up a bit higher, it gets a little bit too glossy. I don't think that looks quite like a tree. And let's bring in a bump node here, and let's try just plugging this inverted value into the height there, and we'll just turn this down to 0.1 and plug this into normal. Okay, there we go. That's probably good. I didn't want to do a huge amount of more work. I didn't want this to be too complicated, so just doing something simple like that goes a long way anyways. I was looking at this edge here, and it just seemed a little ill-defined, so I wanted to tighten that up a little bit. So I came over to this color ramp right here, connected to our bottom setup, and I just put a point in the middle here. So I'm going to put this at 0.415. Oops, no. Not like that. 0.415, and that's the wrong one as well. There we go. 0.415. There we go. And so that's giving me a bit more of an edge there, but I also wanted to kind of break it up a little bit as well. And so I decided, first of all, I'm going to turn this down a little bit to about there. That looks pretty good. And then it looks a little too smooth on the edge there, so I thought I'd add another noise texture in here. So let's bring this texture here, duplicate it, and just put it on the vector line one further in that direction. And it's too much influence there. I'm going to just duplicate this mix, put it right here, and then bring this object into color 2 on that mix. And then let's set this detail to 16, and that factor looks pretty good at 0.8. So my computer's kind of slowing down. I think this is a good place to stop it. I might revisit this at some point because it could always look a bit better, but it's starting to look, you know, I think this looks pretty great. So anyways, thanks for watching, and hope you were able to understand everything there.